So, the results of the first Snap opinion polls on Harry and Meghan are now coming in. Now, yesterday, it emerged that 32% of Brits hated the interview, absolutely hated the interview, and therefore, by connection, the couple. 32% gave it a firm thumbs up, and 34% basically weren't bothered. Are we bothered? No. So that's 66% who either support the couple or don't actually have any real opinion about them either way, which is, I think, very interesting. But as I say, it's volatile. This morning, the Daily Mail, which of course is hardly Meghan's biggest supporter, I mean, they're in a massive legal battle with her, of which she has won the first round, and the Mail have been ordered by a judge to print a front-page apology for things that they've said about Meghan. The Mail are appealing that, but it looks like it is going to happen. So as I say, they're not Meghan's biggest fan at all. They conducted their own poll. They say it was done fairly and squarely, and they report, and this is how things are changing so quickly, that 51% of people asked want Hags and Megs stripped of their royal titles. Only 28% think that they should be allowed to keep them. Now, we've all had a chance to kind of think about this, to sleep on it and reflect on it now. And as far as I can see from the people that I'm talking to and some of the messages I've been getting on Twitter, people's minds are changing. It's a fluid and it's a frankly volatile situation. I'll be absolutely honest. I know that my mind has changed, and in a way that really surprised this kind of cynical old hack. I'm an ex-newspaper man, I'm an ex-newsman. I knew exactly what I was expecting to think when I saw that interview go out. And unlike Mike, who's just handed me the headphones and the microphone, I had a different reaction, and it really surprised me. And it also surprised my wife. Judy and I are at loggerheads over the Markles, as we call them. But never mind us. What do you think? It's getting on for 48 hours later. Are you with the majority in that Daily Mail poll? Do you think the Queen should remove the last vestiges of royalty from her grandson, who she loves very dearly, and his wife? Did they cross the line in giving that interview and saying what they said? 0344 499 1000 is the number to call, or you can text me on 87222, that's 87222, and remember to start your message with the word talk. Now, talking of crossing lines, do you think that Piers Morgan skidded off at the bend this week? He was in defiant mood when Sky News doorstepped him this morning.
I believe in freedom of speech. I believe in the right to be allowed to have an opinion. So if I have to fall on my sword for expressing an honestly held opinion about Meghan Markle and that diatribe of bilge that she came out with in that interview, so be it.
Well, never mind being doorstep, Piers. Come on, give us a ring. I'd love to talk to you. Obviously, well, not obviously, but you may know that I sit in for Piers from time to time on Good Morning Britain when he's away. So full disclosure, there's that connection. And also, I've known Piers for well over 30 years. We went to the same journalism college, and with decades of live broadcasting under my own belt, I mean, I started so long ago, I'm getting so old, I know the pitfalls all too well myself. I know that in terms of live television, this isn't recorded stuff or on a delay, you can get in with the scissors. Once something's said, it cannot ever be unsaid. And now, and particularly with social media, it's out there forever. It just goes round and round and round on the loop. Anyway, all that's later. In the meantime, do you remember this?
The British Secret Service. The name is Bond. James Bond.
The man with the licence to kill. But get this, it turns out this morning, if you've read your papers, that MI5 really do have a licence to kill. Well, at least to commit very serious crimes in pursuit of intelligence. So presumably that includes taking life. It's been said in a formal court ruling by a judge. They can do what they think they need to do to protect the nation. They can cross the line. They can commit crime. Full sanction for doing that if you're a secret agent. I'll be talking to a former colonel of British military intelligence about all of that and his experience and how far he's known his operatives to have gone to protect the UK. It's absolutely fascinating stuff. So sit back, enjoy the show, and let's go.
Across the UK, online, on DAB, and on your smart speaker. This is Talk Radio.
All right, let's start with a story that is just dominating global debate, really. And here in the UK, where it's the epicentre of the story, obviously, even though the interview was recorded on the west coast of America, this is the epicentre of the earthquake, where the royal family live. Most of us Britons think that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex were wrong to have given their explosive interview. It's a new poll. A majority of the public believes that they've let down the Queen, and therefore they should be stripped of their royal titles as a punishment. As a punishment. Now, this survey was conducted in the wake of Oprah Winfrey's bombshell interview, and it's revealed that the monarchy has been damaged, as we all suspected it would be, whatever they said in the interview, and it obviously went much further than any of us could have expected. We knew there'd be some damage. Well, there's been quite a lot. And even with the Queen's personal popularity, that's taken a hit too. Now, I wonder what would have happened if this poll in the Mail this morning, which says that over half of people want the royal titles to be taken away, I wonder if that would have changed things. Because if that poll had been conducted before the Queen's very adroit statement last night, which was very immolatory, wasn't it? It was perfectly judged. You know, that line about, well, you know, maybe we remember things a bit differently. I mean, that's the kind of thing you say when you're having a big marital row, isn't it? When you're trying to calm things down. Well, all right, I'm not going to argue with you, darling, but let's just agree that perhaps we just remembered what was said, what was done a little bit differently. It's balm, it's ointment. That there was a kind of a very gentle pushback against the race allegation, wasn't there? You know, a very gentle line. But apart from that, it was a very immolatory statement. We love them, it said, and basically we want to be friends. It was typical of the Queen. Perfectly judged. But I do wonder if people who were asked those questions in the Mail poll had heard that statement before they were asked, if it would have been quite as savage against the couple. Well, the royal commentator James Brookes is with me now. James, the Queen has clearly accepted that Meghan and Harry had, at least in their own terms, they had a bad time. Do you agree with me that would have had an effect on this morning's Daily Mail poll if it had been conducted after her statement?
Yeah, well, I mean, looking at that statement, you know, it was somewhat expected. I think, you know, there was a long time, obviously, between the interview going out on Sunday night in the States and then the statement coming out, which led to the speculation around what are the royals actually going to say. And arguably, you know, there were some people saying, well, it needs to come from a heartfelt place. It needs to come with, you know, bells and whistles on it, and then others who are saying no, it needs to be the statement that it ended up being, a somewhat expected, diplomatic but quite firm statement. And you know, it is quite clear from the language in that statement the royal family aren't accepting everything, as the couple have alleged, but they're keen to work out these issues privately as a family. And in essence, this statement, they're wanting to give themselves the time to do that. You could argue, however, though, that, you know, Harry and Meghan's interview has likely soured or fractured the relationships even more so than they were before. So while that olive branch has been, you know, tentatively offered by the Queen and the royals, I imagine the uptake on any discussions behind closed doors are probably likely to be a lot cooler. And I think this kind of response is, you know, it's a tried and tested policy for the royals. You know, there's generally always a focus on the family and to avoid any discussion about any wider implications for the institution, you know, of the monarchy. But I don't think it's going to be the complete end of the story. You know, even though they're wanting to, you know, deal with this as a family privately, you know, the allegations made in that interview were severe. And I think they do merit some kind of discussion once we figure out, well, what's been agreed, what's been discussed, what's happened, and where do we end up? Because otherwise you just end up with this speculation that actually ends up being more damaging. The loose ends aren't tied up. And, you know, ultimately, I think it's a bit too serious to just sweep under the carpet and pretend it's not happened. That's unrealistic.
Why do you think it was decided by the palace and possibly personally by the Queen not to be a little more direct in responding to the allegation of this racist remark? Because if the defence is that basically it wasn't meant in the way that it was intended, or it was received and heard, it was in a different context and maybe you remembered it a bit differently, why not, without even having to name the person who said whatever it was that was said, why do you think there wasn't a little bit more context put into it? Said, well, actually, without, as I say, saying who said this, it was in the context of this conversation, and just give a little bit of background to kind of take some of the poison out of the allegation.
Well, because I think mainly, you know, the palace are very keen, and the Queen of the royal family are very keen to get this out of the headlines and try and, you know, move on from it. You know, the Queen and senior royals have always been around, you know, the story shouldn't be around them and the family. It should be around the work that they do and the organisations they represent. So that, you know, they're very keen to, you know, take this offline, so to speak. And I think, you know, the palace was always treading a very fine line here. They know, or they knew, that whatever statement or response they put put out would be critical, ultimately in shaping the way that this goes. And you've got to remember that it's not only the way that this goes in the UK, it's the way that this goes around the world. You mentioned there around, social media. Reading through social media whilst, watching that interview was insightful in itself. And I think, the palace was always trying to think, does it address these allegations head on? In which case it would have been an absolute, minefield to try and kind of navigate. Or does it risk inflaming the situation further as a result of doing that? And I think either way, there's increasing pressure still, I think, to set out the actions that they would want to take on those most serious claims. And we ultimately would hope that, I think, we get some kind of solution at the end of it, because otherwise, like I say, you don't know whether you've reached a conclusion or you haven't, and the discussion just continues to go on and on and on. Meanwhile, all of the work that the royal family are trying to do is put into a shadow.
It's still very early in the morning over in LA, and they'll have had time, obviously, overnight to kind of ruminate on what the Queen said. Do you think we're going to get a response to the response? Do you think that Harry and Meghan are going to issue their own statement about what the Queen said?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if they're considering it. I think they'll be considering what they want to say, if anything, and ultimately whether anything that they would say would add to, the interview and what they said in the interview. Look, I think the interview is really in the same realm as that Panorama interview that Diana did as a milestone moment.
Yeah.
I think it's clearly impactful for the monarchy going forwards, not only just for the family that make up the institution and the relationships that they've got to try and work through, but also with us, via the media, lots of statements made around media coverage of the couple, and then also the institution itself, the processes in place for employees working within the royal household. And I think, hope would be, regardless, and particularly if these allegations are true, the monarchy can take a deep look at itself and change for the better. There's always room for change. The thing to remember is that this is a 1,000-year-old institution, and tradition is no excuse for not changing. I think the palace and the royal family recognise that. They should recognise that. But things aren't clearly going to happen overnight. And for something like this, for allegations like this, when you're talking about attitudes, you're talking about potential unconscious bias, I think the palace would rather shift the talk away from the interview, of course, but the interview being out in the open will continue to push this discussion. And ultimately, I do think that is a good thing. I think what we don't know yet is whether the relationships within the royal family can survive and recoup after a blow like this. Is the trust still there? Can that be rebuilt? And I think that might be the point that Harry and Meghan eventually, in 5-10 years, however long, come to regret. Has throwing this grenade behind them just forced a defensive from the palace and really destroyed any willingness to understand, learn and change, or not?
Yep. Just very briefly, because we're almost out of time. I've mentioned the poll this morning. Over half of people at the Mail question think that the couple should be stripped of the royal titles. I'm looking at my screen here in the studio, and I'm getting very similar messages from most of the listeners. They think that they should be punished, that the titles should be stripped. But it's not going to happen, is it?
I don't think so. I think, looking at that statement, the last line was Harry, Meghan and Archie will always be much loved members of the family, or much loved family members. I think if it was going to, it would arguably be more damaging now for the Queen and the royals to come out and, strip them of the titles after they've put out a statement like that. It almost looks hypocritical. How can they be much loved, but then you're still, almost taking revenge on them? So I don't think it's going to happen. And ultimately that decision would lie with the Queen anyway. So
Okay.
I think we'll just have to wait and see what comes out of those discussions behind closed doors.
And very quickly, setting aside what they said and the allegations that they made, how do you think that they came over in that interview?
I think they were obviously at points very uncomfortable with some of the questioning, Harry particularly, but equally they were very determined to make their points clear. This has always been viewed as their chance to get their side of the story out, their truth, as it's been termed. Ultimately there are, however, two sides to every story, and that's why I think these discussions going on behind palace doors ultimately need to be made public, or the results of which need to be made public, so ultimately we can hear the other side of the story and people people can make a decision based on the balance of facts.
Well, a couple of days after the interview's gone out, as I said, I'm finding that people that I know are shifting their opinions about the interview. As far as I'm concerned, when I went to bed before the clips were shown on the breakfast stations the next morning, I was expecting to be extremely irritated by it. I was expecting to watch a 2-hour whinge, basically, and to hear a lot of California speak from Harry, new California speak, woke speak from Harry, and a theatrical performance, a transparently theatrical performance from Meghan. And I have to say that those expectations, near certainties, in my case, were confounded. I actually thought they came across not badly at all. There were inconsistencies in some of the allegations. Some of them were petty and silly, and Harry complaining that his father's cut his money off. Well, he's got a £10 million inheritance from his mum, so that's not such a big problem for him. But I actually thought that they weren't acting. They weren't putting it on, and they weren't pretending. And I thought, for example, when Harry talked about his father not taking his calls and only taking messages from Harry in writing, you could see the pain etched on his face. And also, when she was talking about her suicidal tendencies in that period and talking about her feelings of being isolated, I didn't think she was exaggerating it or making it up. I saw an unhappy couple, and at the end of it all, there were criticisms. I do think that there were inconsistencies in the story, and there was a bit of glossing over here and there. But at the end, I kind of felt sorry for this young couple who'd found themselves in this nightmarish situation. Did you have sympathy with them?
I think, there were points of that interview that were incredibly difficult to watch and hear.
Yes.
I think we were shocked. We were expecting controversial and revelations to come out of it. We weren't necessarily expecting the raw emotion that came out of it. And I think, ultimately, the interview, Oprah did push back on a number of points. There's a lot of interview, on the cutting room floor. It must have been an absolute nightmare to choose, what do we actually put into this interview? Because there was so much. But Oprah did push back on a number of those points. When Harry talked about being trapped in the royal family, she asked, well, how can somebody be in that privileged situation and be described as trapped? She pushed for more details on the race remarks, but clearly Harry and Meghan weren't comfortable sharing that. And I think, that's why it's such a milestone moment, because very, very rarely do we get to see this kind of emotion and insight into the royals' personal lives and thinking. And that's why it's such a kind of a milestone.
Agreed. And it's been 25 years. It seems these milestones come along about every 25 years. The last one, of course, was with Diana. James Brookes, royal commentator, thank you very much indeed for your time. I really enjoyed your analysis.